Hey guys, what is up, and I welcome each and every one of you to a new League of Legends video. So today we're going to be going over the biggest changes, nerfs, and buffs coming over to patch 9.19, which is the world's patch. So if you end up enjoying the video, then don't forget to hit that like button, but let's just get right into it. So let's start things off by talking about the nerfs that'll be hitting this patch. First one we have is Karma. Her Q-AP ratio is being lowered by 20%. Now that's actually quite a bit. I think that's specifically aimed for a kind of LCS pro level worlds nerf, because I don't think Karma's, in my games at least, are that impactful to where she's pretty much getting a 20% AP ratio Q nerf. But even with that being said, I mean, that's still gonna affect solo Q Karma, of course, which is gonna be a fairly large hit. Moving along, we also have a nerf coming over to Tahm Kench, also a little bit surprising, probably aimed specifically for Worlds as well, where his E-heal from Grey Health has been lowered from 75% to now starting at 30%, but going up to 100 by champion level. So in other words, he'll be a lot tankier with how he can use his E ability later on into the game, but the earlier parts is going to be substantially weaker. So specifically his laning phase, whether you're playing him top lane or as support, it's not going to be as forgiving. Moving along, we also have a nerf coming over to Yuumi. Now this is a pretty big one. You can see here the Q slow is going down to straight 20% rather than starting at 20 but going all the way up to 80 as you rank it up. As if that wasn't enough, her Q slow duration is also being lowered down to 1 second now rather than 1.5 seconds, and the Q slow no longer decays, which is actually a slight good thing. All in all, a pretty big nerf coming over for Yuumi. I mean, the Q ability is pretty obnoxious because it's almost impossible to miss, and the slow is actually quite substantial since you do max it first. So personally, as a mid lane player, I'm very happy to see this nerf. I think the champion is extremely overpowered, but if you're a Yuumi player, at least on the bright side, you're still going to be able to save your allies just as well, since her healing and her ultimate and her shield have not been touched. Next up, we also have some nerfs coming over to Gragas, which is a surprisingly actually pretty strong champion at the very moment. His W cooldown is going up by 1 second. His W's damage is going down by 1% of the target's max HP. So definitely a slight slap on the wrist. I mean, not the biggest nerf in the entire world, but it'll of course make him just a tad less efficient and a tad weaker. For a champion that's already considered, in my opinion, to be very well-rounded and very strong, this isn't too bad. Following that, we also have a nerf coming over to Sejuani, where her passive damage has been changed to now being only 10% of the target's max HP, where before, or I guess at the very moment, it starts at 10% but goes up to 20%. So you don't need me to tell you that this is definitely a pretty big nerf. I mean, she's going to be scaling a lot less. I mean, on the bright side, I think it's actually a good nerf, because you should pick this champion not for the damage, right? You should be picking this champion for the engage, for the CC. That's what Sejuani is picked for. So lowering the damage means that she's more solely chosen for just the straight composition and just the straight CC. And the final nerf is going to be to our boy Sylas, who's just getting nerfed and changed left and right, but somehow always manages to be still very, very strong. So the nerf for Sylas is as follows. His base armor is being lowered by 7, so now it's 25, which is a lot. I mean, whether it's jungle Sylas for obvious reasons, or mid lane Sylas, let's say top lane Sylas, right, facing an AD champion in lane, that's a lot of armor lost. His armor per level has been decreased by 0.5, so now he only gets 2.5 armor per level. His base attack speed has been increased, so it's a little bit faster, but I mean, that's not really that much of a deal. All it means is that you'll get your passives off a little bit faster, which, I mean, I guess it's not bad, right? It's a worthy trade-off, but he's also going to be a lot squishier now to 80 champions. Now, this is actually a good nerf, and I say that in a way of that no one can really be too mad, because yeah, he shouldn't be strong against 80 champions. He's supposed to be an anti-AP type champion, so he still excels at that. And if anything, he's actually even stronger against those champions for the most part. But if he's facing a counter matchup, it's actually going to finally be a counter matchup. Alright, so now that we got all the nerfs out of the way, let's jump right into the buffs, because there's quite a bit. Starting off with Mordekaiser. Now, a little bit surprising, but yeah, he is getting a buff. His damage dealt to shield generation has been increased by 5%, and now, I guess for Worlds, spectators can now see who's inside the Mordekaiser ultimate. Now, Mordekaiser is a champion that's very scary. You have to tread very carefully with him when you come to buff him, so this is a nice, smallish kind of buff that will make him a little bit stronger, but nothing too crazy. Next up, a quick buff coming over to Sion, where his W shield is being increased by 20 across the board. Now, of course, Sion also a very strong champion. If the tank meta is back, he is usually the best tank if he's slightly overtuned, so also being very careful with him. But it doesn't stop there, because Ornn is also getting some buffs as well to his passive, where the passive level for masterwork items is being decreased down to 12 rather than 13, so you get those power spikes a little bit faster, which is pretty cool. Now, this is the one that I think a lot of people are going to be very maybe upset about. I mean, if you're a Riven player, you'll be happy about it, but it's an interesting one. So Riven is getting some buffs. Now, maybe it's a coincidence that it's kind of, you know, the same patch as her new skin, and maybe it's not, who knows, but let's go into the actual buff. The W80 ratio has been increased by 30%. Yes, you heard that correctly, 30%, 30, so it's now 130%. Yes, you heard that correctly. Her R damage is now being increased by 50 level 1, but up to 300 by the time you max it out, with an extra 30% of bonus ratio as well. So the 90% AD ratio as opposed to 60. And her R2, or in other words, the execute R, the amplification has been changed from 0 to 200% to now being from 0 to 100%. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but it does seem like that makes the second part of her R actually a little bit weaker. I think for obvious reasons, considering she just got disgusting buffs on her W and her first part of the R. So if you use it on a target that's, you know, under 30% HP, it actually do a little bit less damage in terms of the second R itself, but that's fine and all because, again, don't forget, a bunch of extra damage added to the rest of her kit. So let me know down in the comments below, what do you think of the buffs coming over to Riven? But speaking of questionable buffs, we also have some buffs coming over to Fiora. Her Q ability can now hit towers, plants, wards, and her second E can now crit turrets. Now this is a horrible change, and the reason for that is because Fiora becomes just that good at split pushing, because you obviously almost always go try for some Fiora. It's a great item on her. Combine that with the tower damage now that she can use her Q and second E to hit the towers with, considering it can crit, that's gonna make her not only a very strong one-on-one duelist, but also just an absolute tower taking destruction machine. So that is going to be very, very scary to see if this buff goes through. Moving along, we also have a buff coming over to Rek'Sai where her unburrowed Q works on towers and her base armor is being increased by 3. Now this is actually pretty good. I'm surprised her unburrowed Q actually didn't work on towers before, to be completely honest with you, as long as her E doesn't somehow magically work as well. And it'll also make her jungle clear a little bit healthier since now she has a little bit of extra armor. Following this, we have a buff to Xin Zhao where his passive heal at the earlier ranks has been increased just a little bit, but as you rank up the champion and you become a higher level and further into the game, it actually gets increased by almost an extra 20, which isn't that bad. And his Q damage is also being increased as you rank up the ability by an extra 12 by the final rank, so nothing completely over the top, but Xin is also one of those champions where if he's overtuned, he's pretty much an unstoppable 1v9 machine. Next up, we have a nice quick simple buff coming to Graves where his base AD has been increased by 3. Now, even though it's a very quick simple buff, it's also a very impactful one. 3 bonus AD, that's increased auto damage, that's a faster clear, that's more damage on his abilities, right? It adds a lot more than you would think, especially if he gets anything like a Sheen, which I don't think they do, but on the off chance he decides to, that's even better as well. Next up, we have a buff coming over to Zac where his passive max health restore has been changed from 4% to now starting at 4 going up to 6 based on champion level, and his passive cooldown has also been changed. Now the notes that Riot gave us don't make any sense. That there's some weird gibberish written here, so I don't know how it's been changed, but I'm assuming it's been lowered. Following this, we have some Twisted Fate buffs. Now that's not a champion I thought I would hear buffs coming for in a long time. Now they're pretty exciting actually. His E attack speed has been increased by 10% across the board, and the damage on his E ability has also been increased by just a flat 10 across the board as well. Nothing too crazy, but hey, TF buffs are always welcome. Moving along, some quick buffs coming over to Veigar, yet another champion I thought Riot has forgotten about, but the buff is towards his E's cooldown, where by the time you rank it to rank 5, it's now 2 seconds shorter. This is actually a surprisingly pretty good buff, and the reason is because his E, in my opinion, is one of the best non-ultimate abilities in League of Legends. It's very impactful, and a lower cooldown, especially with some CDR, is pretty massive. Next up, we have buffs coming over to Orianna where her ultimate's damage has been increased. So the base damage has been increased by 50 and the AP ratio has been increased by 10%. So make it a really truly just a one-hit wonder. So if you actually land the ultimate, you win the team fight. If you miss it or it's a bad one, then it's looking a little bit questionable. We also have some buffs coming to Heimerdinger, also a champion I thought Riot has forgotten about. His base HP has been increased by 12, which is not too bad at all. His QAP ratio has increased by 5%, and the stun duration on his E is increased by 0.25. All in all, some pretty surprisingly good buffs coming over to Heimer. I have to say, if you're a Heimer player, then this is something you should definitely look forward to. Next up, some buffs coming to Cassiopeia, which I'm absolutely just flabbergasted, but her E empowered damage has been increased by 10 at every single rank. Why? I do not know. She spams her E often. 10 damage doesn't sound like a lot, but considering how often she uses it, it adds up pretty quickly. I think the champion is fine personally, but I guess Riot thinks otherwise. Moving along, we have a buff to Vayne where her ultimate's AD steroid has been increased by 5 at rank 1, but 15 extra AD by the time you get it to rank 3, which is actually pretty good. Will this be enough to make Vayne an actual top tier AD carry? Honestly, it just might. Next up, we have a buff coming to Ashe where her Q now resets her auto attack, which I'm very shocked that hasn't before. I feel like it's always It always should have, honestly. And her passive slow has been increased by 5% at the earlier ranks. And last but not least, we have our favorite robot in League of Legends, Blitzcrank. The Q range has been increased by 100. That's actually huge. A lot of people that play League of Legends, especially like me, you get used to the range of abilities. Now you get used to how far an ability can travel, especially something like a hook, like a Blitzcrank Q. Now that it's increased, it's going to catch people off guard quite a bit. So the second this buff comes to the live servers, I recommend you abuse Blitzcrank. You'll catch people off guard easily, and you'll probably get some free low LP. On top of that though, his R passive max stacks has also been increased to 3. Before we end off the video, some quick changes coming over to TFT. We have a new champion coming out. Actually, Kaisa should be hitting in the live servers next patch, I believe. And you can see here on your screen a bunch of changes and nerfs and buffs coming over to the champions, and of course also to Yordles and the Voids. I'm not going to go over it too much. I want to just kind of throw it on the screen in case you care, but personally I don't care about TFT, so I thought I'd put it in here just very quickly. And last but definitely not least, we have some gorgeous new skins coming out, such as Hextech Amumu, Majestic Empress Morgana, a Splendid Staff Nami, Valiant Sword Riven, and of course a prestige version of it as well, and Championship Rise, which is going to be this year's championship skin, which looks really cool. But either way guys, that is it for this video. There you have it, a bunch of changes already in store for the next patch, which is the patch for Worlds. Let me know what you think about it down below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you for the next one. Peace.